My cousin Stephanie's wedding reception was everything she dreamed of, a ballroom filled with twinkling lights, an open bar, and the kind of fairy tale celebration that made my family believe in happily ever after. At 26, I was the only single woman at our table, and my mother never let anyone forget it. "Look at how beautiful Stephanie looks," Mom announced to our table of relatives. "This is what every woman should aspire to, finding her soulmate, building a life together. Some people understand priorities." She gestured meaningfully in my direction while I picked at my chicken dinner. The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone at table 7. My aunt and uncle nodded sympathetically, their expressions mixing pity with concern. "Sarah's always been different," Mom continued, accepting condolences like I was terminally ill. "Too focused on her writing to think about real relationships. 26 years old and still single because she spends all her time locked in her apartment with her laptop." My cousin David leaned forward from across the table. "What exactly are you writing anyway? Still working on that book you mentioned last Christmas?" "I'm a novelist," I said quietly. "I write contemporary fiction." Uncle Tom snorted into his beer. "Novelist? That's not a real job, honey. That's a hobby that's gotten out of hand. How many people actually make money writing books?" "1 in a million." The table erupted in knowing laughter. My family had spent years treating my writing career as an extended delusion that I'd eventually outgrow once reality set in. They didn't know that my debut novel had been quietly climbing bestseller lists for the past month, or that my publisher was already planning a major marketing campaign. "The problem is she thinks she's going to be the next Stephen King," Mom explained to Stephanie's new in-laws. "Living in a fantasy world instead of focusing on what really matters. No boyfriend, no prospects, just endless typing and rejection letters." Aunt Patricia nodded knowingly. "Writers are all like that, antisocial, unrealistic, living in their heads. Sarah probably thinks she's too good for normal men because she's artistic." I took a sip of wine and stayed quiet. What they didn't know was that my agent had fielded calls from 3 major film studios interested in adaptation rights, or that my book had already sold translation rights in 12 countries. But explaining that would sound like fantasy to people who viewed writing as an elaborate way of avoiding adult responsibilities. "Remember when you wanted to be a writer in high school?" David asked with amusement. "We all thought it was a phase like wanting to be an astronaut. Most people grow out of childhood dreams." The condescension was thick enough to cut. My family had spent years dismissing my MFA degree, my literary awards, and my publication credits as expensive hobbies rather than professional achievements. "She could have been married by now," Mom said with theatrical sadness. "Remember Jake from college? He was perfect for her, stable job, good family, ready to settle down. But Sarah chose her imaginary characters over a real relationship." The guests murmured sympathetically while I thought about the book signing I had scheduled next week at Barnes & Noble. The initial print run of 100,000 copies had sold out in 3 weeks, forcing my publisher to rush a second printing. "No one wants a workaholic," Mom declared loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "Men want partners who are present, who prioritize family over fantasy. Sarah's so obsessed with her writing that she's forgotten how to have normal human relationships." The dance floor was packed with couples swaying to romantic music while I sat listening to my family explain my failures to strangers. Stephanie looked radiant in her white dress, surrounded by evidence of successful domesticity, a devoted husband, supportive family, and a future filled with suburban bliss. "What happens when she gets old?" Aunt Patricia asked with genuine concern. "When the writing dream finally dies and she realizes she's wasted her best years. Stephanie will have children and grandchildren, but Sarah will have nothing but a drawer full of unpublished manuscripts." I watched this analysis of my life choices while remembering the phone call from my editor yesterday. The book had hit #1 on the Amazon charts, and major bookstore chains were placing rush orders to keep up with demand. "The saddest part is she's not even successful at it," Uncle Tom added. "If she was making millions like those famous authors, at least the sacrifice would make sense. But she's basically unemployed, living off savings and delusions." My phone had been buzzing all evening with congratulations from my agent, editor, and fellow writers, but I'd kept it silenced out of respect for the wedding. Drawing attention to my phone would only reinforce their perception that I was antisocial and obsessed with technology. "Turn the music down for a minute," the DJ announced from his booth near the dance floor. I have a special announcement for one of our guests tonight. The ballroom fell quiet as couples paused their dancing. Stephanie looked up from her conversation with the maid of honor, curious about the interruption. We have a celebrity author in the house tonight, the DJ continued enthusiastically. Sarah Mitchell's debut novel, The Last Summer, just hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list this morning. Congratulations, Sarah. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear silverware clinking in the kitchen. Every head at table 7 turned toward me in unison, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief. Sarah Mitchell? David said slowly. Our Sarah. The book that everyone's talking about? Aunt Patricia whispered. The one they featured on Good Morning America? My phone, which had been silently collecting congratulations all evening, suddenly rang out loud. The caller ID showed my agent's number. Are you going to answer that? Mom asked, her voice strangely high. I reluctantly picked up, putting the call on speaker without thinking. Hello, Margaret. Sarah. I've been trying to reach you all day. The numbers are incredible. We hit #1 in 7 countries simultaneously. HarperCollins wants to discuss a 3-book deal, and Netflix just made a preliminary offer for series rights. The table sat frozen as my agent's excitement filled the air around us. The foreign sales are through the roof, Margaret continued. Your book is being compared to The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and Where the Crawdads Sing. Everyone's calling it the debut of the decade. Uncle Tom was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah, is this real? Before I could answer, David held up his phone. Holy shit, she's all over social media. Look, The Last Summer by Sarah Mitchell tops bestseller charts worldwide. Language, Aunt Patricia scolded automatically, but her heart wasn't in it. She was frantically Googling my name on her own device. The publisher wants to schedule a 12-city book tour, Margaret continued through the phone. And James Corden's people called about a television appearance. Sarah, this is the kind of success most authors dream about their entire careers. Mom finally found her voice. Honey, why didn't you tell us this was happening? I tried to, I said quietly. Every time I mentioned my book, you changed the subject to talk about when I was getting married. The DJ, clearly excited by the drama he'd caused, continued his announcement. Sarah's book has already sold over 200,000 copies in its first month and is being translated into 15 languages. Let's give our best-selling author a round of applause. The entire ballroom erupted in cheers and applause. Guests who'd never heard of me an hour ago were now clapping enthusiastically for the celebrity in their midst. Stephanie looked torn between delight at the attention and annoyance that her wedding was being upstaged. 200,000 copies? Mom asked weakly. The advance alone was 6 figures, I confirmed. With royalties, film rights, and international sales. Let's just say I won't be living off savings much longer. Aunt Patricia was still scrolling through articles about my book. It says here you've been writing professionally for 5 years. Sarah, we thought you were just playing around. I was building a career, I said. While you were telling me to get a real job, I was getting published in literary magazines, winning writing contests, and working with agents and editors. The celebration around us continued as wedding guests approached our table to congratulate me. Strangers were asking for autographs and selfies while my family sat in stunned silence. We had no idea you were so successful, David said, his earlier mockery completely gone. You didn't want to know, I said, standing up from the table. You decided writing wasn't a real career, so everything I accomplished became irrelevant by extension. I picked up my purse as more guests gathered around, excited to meet a best-selling author. Enjoy the rest of the reception. I have some interviews to schedule. Where are you going? Mom called after me. Back to my antisocial, unrealistic life, I said. The one that just made me a best-selling author. As I made my way through the crowd of congratulatory strangers, I could hear urgent whispers starting at table 7. My phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, book club invitations, and congratulations from fellow writers. But I was done seeking my family's approval. I'd built something extraordinary while they complained about my choices, and I'd done it without their support or understanding. 6 months later, The Last Summer had sold over 1 million copies worldwide. The Netflix series was in pre-production, and my second novel had already received a 7-figure advance. At my book launch party, surrounded by publishers, agents, and fellow authors who understood the value of storytelling, I felt more at home than I ever had at family gatherings. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones other people can't imagine anyone wanting to read, until the whole world proves them wrong.